Part Two, Chapter 4 of The Idiot. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Eva M. Martin. Part 2, Chapter 4. They passed through the same rooms which the prince had traversed on his arrival. In the largest there were pictures on the walls, portraits and landscapes of little interest. Over the door, however, there was one of strange and rather striking shape. It was 6 or 7 feet in length, and not more than a foot in height. It represented the Saviour just taken from the cross. The prince glanced at it, but took no further notice. He moved on hastily, as though anxious to get out of the house. But Rogojin suddenly stopped underneath the picture. "My father picked up all these pictures very cheap at auctions and so on," he said. "They are all rubbish, except the one over the door, and that is valuable. A man offered 500 roubles for it last week." "Yes, that's a copy of a Holbein," said the prince, looking at it again. "And a good copy, too, as far as I am able to judge. I saw the picture abroad and could not forget it. What's the matter?" Rogojin had dropped the subject of the picture and walked on. Of course his strange frame of mind was sufficient to account for his conduct, but still it seemed queer to the prince that he should so abruptly drop a conversation commenced by himself. Rogojin did not take any notice of his question. "Lef Nicolaievitch," said Rogojin after a pause, during which the two walked along a little further, "I have long wished to ask you, do you believe in God?" "How strangely you speak, and how odd you look," said the other involuntarily. "I like looking at that picture," muttered Rogojin, not noticing apparently that the prince had not answered his question. "That picture! That picture!" cried Muishkin, struck by a sudden idea. "Why, a man's faith might be ruined by looking at that picture." "So it is," said Rogojin unexpectedly. They had now reached the front door. The prince stopped. "How?" he said. "What do you mean? I was half joking, and you took me up quite seriously. Why do you ask me whether I believe in God?" "Oh, no particular reason. I meant to ask you before. Many people are unbelievers nowadays, especially Russians, I've been told. You ought to know, you've lived abroad." Rogojin laughed bitterly as he said these words, and opening the door, held it for the prince to pass out. Muishkin looked surprised, but went out. The other followed him as far as the landing of the outer stairs, and shut the door behind him. They both now stood facing one another, as though oblivious of where they were, or what they had to do next. "Well, good-bye," said the prince, holding out his hand. "Good-bye," said Rogojin, pressing it hard, but quite mechanically. The prince made one step forward, and then turned round. "As to faith," he said, smiling, and evidently unwilling to leave Rogojin in this state, "as to faith, I had 4 curious conversations in 2 days, a week or so ago. One morning I met a man in the train, and made acquaintance with him at once. I had often heard of him as a very learned man, but an atheist. I was very glad of the opportunity of conversing with so eminent and clever a person. He doesn't believe in God, and he talked a good deal about it, but all the while it appeared to me that he was speaking outside the subject. And it has always struck me, both in speaking to such men and in reading their books, that they do not seem really to be touching on that at all, though on the surface they may appear to do so. I told him this, but I dare say I did not clearly express what I meant, for he could not understand me. That same evening I stopped at a small provincial hotel, and it so happened that a dreadful murder had been committed there the night before, and everybody was talking about it. Two peasants, elderly men and old friends, had had tea together there the night before, and were to occupy the same bedroom. They were not drunk, but one of them had noticed for the first time that his friend possessed a silver watch which he was wearing on a chain. He was by no means a thief, and was, as peasants go, a rich man. But this watch so fascinated him that he could not restrain himself. He took a knife, and when his friend turned his back, he came up softly behind, raised his eyes to heaven, crossed himself, and saying earnestly, "God forgive me, for Christ's sake," he cut his friend's throat like a sheep, and took the watch. Rogojin roared with laughter. He laughed as though he were in a sort of fit. It was strange to see him laughing so after the sombre mood he had been in just before. "Oh, I like that! That beats anything!" he cried convulsively, panting for breath. "One is an absolute unbeliever. The other is such a thoroughgoing believer that he murders his friend to the tune of a prayer. Oh, prince, that's too good for anything. You can't have invented it. It's the best thing I've heard." "Next morning I went out for a stroll through the town," continued the prince, so soon as Rogojin was a little quieter, though his laughter still burst out at intervals, and soon observed a drunken-looking soldier staggering about the pavement. He came up to me and said, "Buy my silver cross, sir. You shall have it for 4d. It's real silver." I looked, and there he held a cross, just taken from his own neck evidently, a large tin one, made after the Byzantine pattern. I fished out 4d, and put his cross on my own neck, and could see by his face that he was as pleased as he could be at the thought that he had succeeded in cheating a foolish gentleman, and away he went to drink the value of his cross. At that time everything that I saw made a tremendous impression upon me. I had understood nothing about Russia before, and had only vague and fantastic memories of it. So I thought, I will wait a while before I condemn this Judas. Only God knows what may be hidden in the hearts of drunkards. Well, I went homewards, and near the hotel I came across a poor woman carrying a child, a baby of some 6 weeks old. The mother was quite a girl herself. The baby was smiling up at her, for the first time in its life, just at that moment, and while I watched the woman, she suddenly crossed herself. Oh, so devoutly! "What is it, my good woman?" I asked her. I was never but asking questions then. "Exactly as is a mother's joy when her baby smiles for the first time into her eyes, so is God's joy when one of his children turns and prays to him for the first time, with all his heart." This is what the poor woman said to me, almost word for word. And such a deep, refined, truly religious thought it was, a thought in which the whole essence of Christianity was expressed in one flash, that is, the recognition of God as our Father, and of God's joy in men as his own children, which is the chief idea of Christ. She was a simple countrywoman, a mother, it's true, and perhaps, who knows, she may have been the wife of the drunken soldier. Listen, Parfen, you put a question to me just now. This is my reply. The essence of religious feeling has nothing to do with reason, or atheism, or crime, or acts of any kind. It has nothing to do with these things, and never had. There is something besides all this, something which the